Mister, stop. Don't go in there. Annie blurted it out, her voice breaking as the words rushed together. She lifted one small hand toward him, fingers spread, trembling in the air like a stop sign she wasn't sure would work. Daniel Wright halted mid-step. The interruption irritated him before it surprised him. He had been moving fast, mind already inside the meeting, already weighing numbers and outcomes. He looked down, expecting to see a staffer's child who had wandered too far. Instead, he saw a girl 6 years old at most, standing squarely in his path. "Hey," he said, steady but firm. "You're blocking the doorway." Annie didn't move. "I really need to get inside," Daniel continued. "You can't stand here." "I know," she said quickly. "That's why I'm here." Her hand stayed raised. She was shaking now. Not just her fingers, but her shoulders too, as if fear were running through her body faster than she could control it. Daniel exhaled, keeping his voice even. "Listen, you're not in trouble, but you're in the way." "I have to be," Annie whispered. He glanced past her toward the closed conference room door. The meeting had already started. He could hear muffled voices, relaxed, confident. The sound irritated him more than the delay. "Annie," he said, reading the name stitched onto the strap of her backpack. "I don't want to be rude, but you're stopping me from doing my job." Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to him. "If you go in now," she said, "they'll win." That made him pause. "What?" he asked. "They're ready," she said. "They put something there." Daniel straightened slightly. "Put what where?" Annie took a half step closer, lowering her voice. "In the room, near the table. I saw them last night." Daniel felt a prickle of unease, though he told himself not to indulge it. Children misinterpreted things. That was normal. "Saw who?" "The men," she said. "The ones who laughed too much." He almost smiled at that, then didn't. "Annie," he said carefully. "What exactly did you see?" She swallowed. "A little black thing, with a wire." They hid it under the edge. Daniel's irritation faded, replaced by something colder. "What kind of thing?" "I don't know the name," she said quickly, afraid he would dismiss her. "But my dad fixes rooms like that. He checks for them. He says they listen even when you don't know." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Your dad works here?" "Yes," she nodded. "He cleans and fixes the computers. He showed me once. He said bad people use them to make others look guilty." Daniel didn't respond immediately. "You're saying there's a recording device in that room?" he said slowly. "Yes," Annie whispered. "And they said they'd turn it on when you sat down." Daniel's spine stiffened. His hand curled slightly at his side. "Why would they do that?" Annie shook her head. "I don't know all the words, but I know your name. They said it a lot." The sound of laughter drifted faintly through the door. Familiar voices. Trusted voices. Daniel took a step toward the door. Annie reacted instantly, stepping in front of him again. Both hands out now, panic flashing across her face. "No, please." "Not yet, Annie," he said, firmer now. "You can't physically stop me. I have to," she said, tears pooling but not falling. "If you go in, they'll say you did something you didn't. They said they'd use it against you." The words hit harder than he expected. "Use what against me?" he asked. "The recording," she said. "They'll cut it. My dad said you can make anyone sound bad if you cut it right." Daniel felt his body go rigid. He had spent his life navigating risk, contracts, hostile takeovers, lawsuits. He knew what an illegal recording could do in the wrong hands. He also knew how often threats came disguised as children's fears. But something about the way Annie stood there, small, shaking, but unmoving, kept him from brushing past her. "When did you hear this?" he asked. "Last night," she said. "I was waiting for my dad. They didn't see me. They forgot to close the door." "What exactly did they say?" Daniel pressed. She closed her eyes, concentrating. One of them said, "Once he talks, we've got him." Another said, "The device will do the rest." And then they laughed. Daniel's breathing slowed. "Annie," he said quietly, "do you know what happens if you're wrong?" She opened her eyes. "Yes." "What?" "You'll be mad at me," she said. "And my dad might lose his job." The words landed with a weight that had nothing to do with corporate risk. "Then why tell me?" Daniel asked. "Because if I don't, she said softly. Everyone else loses. Daniel looked at the door again, then at the girl, then back at the door. You're delaying an entire board meeting, he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. She nodded. Just for a little. How long? He asked. Until you hear them yourself, she said. Daniel hesitated. Years of instinct urged him forward. The discipline that had built his company told him not to let emotion dictate timing. Another instinct, older, quieter, told him that the most dangerous moments were the ones you rushed through. Where is this device? He asked. Under the table, Annie said. On the side where you sit. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He took a deliberate step away from the door. Annie's breath hitched. Okay, he said calmly. We're not going in yet. Her shoulders sagged with relief, as if she had been holding herself upright by sheer will. But you have to be quiet, he added. Can you do that? She nodded immediately, pressing her lips together with both hands for emphasis. Daniel turned his body slightly, angling himself toward the door but not touching it. He leaned closer, just enough to hear. Inside, a voice said, once he starts talking, we trigger it. Daniel's blood went cold. Annie's eyes widened. She looked up at him, terrified but certain. Daniel didn't look back at her. He kept his gaze on the door, listening, and in that moment, standing in a hallway, delayed by a child who refused to move, he understood something that had nothing to do with power or position. If Annie hadn't stopped him, he would have walked straight into the trap. He lowered his voice to a whisper. You did the right thing, he said. Annie nodded, gripping the straps of her backpack like an anchor. They stood there together, waiting, and Daniel Wright, who had built his life on decisive action, chose stillness instead. Daniel Wright did not move. The hallway felt narrower now, as if the walls themselves had leaned in. He stood beside the closed conference room door, hands relaxed at his sides, posture calm enough to fool anyone passing by. Inside, voices continued, confident and careless. Outside, time stretched thin. Annie stayed close to him, her small body angled toward the door, her head tilted slightly as if she were listening with her whole self. She didn't speak. She didn't fidget. She did exactly what she had promised. Daniel had built an empire by understanding timing. Markets rose and fell on timing. Deals succeeded or died on timing. But this was different. This was not about acting at the right moment. It was about not acting too soon. From behind the door, a voice said, once he starts talking, it's clean. We'll have what we need. Daniel's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes forward, unfocused, as if he were alone with his thoughts instead of standing inches from a betrayal. He thought of the first office he'd ever rented. A converted storage space with flickering lights and a coffee machine that only worked if you kicked it. He had slept there some nights, jacket folded under his head, convinced that if he stopped moving, even for a day, the whole thing would collapse. Back then, he had trusted no one, not because he was suspicious by nature, but because there was no one to trust. That changed as the company grew. He hired people smarter than him, people with credentials he didn't have, people who spoke in polished language and understood systems he was still learning to navigate. Trust became a necessity. Delegation became survival. Somewhere along the way, trust had become habit. Another voice floated through the door. He won't suspect a thing. He never does. Daniel exhaled slowly. Annie shifted slightly, her shoulder brushing his arm. He glanced down at her. Just for a second. She was still shaking, but she hadn't backed away. Whatever fear she felt, she was carrying it without complaint. Are you okay? He murmured. She nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on the door. They talk loud when they think they're safe, she whispered. My dad says that's when you learn the most. Daniel absorbed that. Your dad sounds like a smart man, he almost said, but held the words back. This wasn't the time for reassurance that sounded like praise. It was the time for listening. Inside, a chair scraped. Someone laughed. A glass clinked against the table. They won't trace it back to us, a voice said. By the time legal untangles it, he'll be out. Daniel's fingers curled, then relaxed again. Anger would come later. Right now, clarity mattered more. He leaned slightly toward the door, careful not to touch it. The soundproofing was good, but not perfect. Enough leaked through for someone who knew how to listen. He thought about the seat at the table. His seat. The place everyone deferred to when he was present. The place they were clearly comfortable occupying when he was not. Annie had said the device was under the table, on the side where he sat. He pictured it easily. A small recorder, a transmitter, something designed to capture fragments, to be edited and weaponized. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with fear for himself. If they were willing to do this to him, what had they already done to others? A voice inside the room said, "Once the conference hits, the board will want stability. They'll choose us." Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment. Stability. The word had been used on him more times than he could count. Investors wanted it. Boards demanded it. Employees depended on it. Stability was the excuse for every compromise that chipped away at principles just enough to be convenient. He opened his eyes again and looked at Annie. "How did you know it was wrong?" he asked quietly. She frowned, thinking, "Because they didn't sound like my dad," she said. "When my dad fixes things, he talks like he's helping. They talked like they were hiding." Daniel nodded. That was as good a definition of integrity as he'd heard in years. The door handle twitched slightly, then stilled. Someone inside must have shifted their weight against it. Daniel stepped back half an inch, enough to avoid casting a shadow beneath the frame. "Stay right here," he whispered to Annie. She nodded again. Daniel reached into his pocket, fingers brushing the edge of his phone. He didn't pull it out yet. Not until he knew exactly what he needed. Panic calls led to mistakes. He had learned that the hard way. Another voice, sharper this time, said, "We only get one shot. If he figures it out." "He won't," someone cut in. "He trusts us." Daniel felt the words land with a dull finality. If this moment made you feel something, pause for a second and let us know. Tap like if this story spoke to you. Share your thoughts in the comments right where you are watching. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. He thought of the nights he'd stayed late with these same people. The dinners, the jokes, the shared language of success. Trust wasn't something they had taken from him. It was something he had given freely. Annie tugged lightly at his sleeve. "They're saying your name again," she whispered. He leaned closer, straining to hear. "Daniel's predictable," a voice said. "He'll open with the vision piece." "That's when we..." Daniel straightened. That was enough. He stepped back from the door, turning his body slightly so he was no longer aligned with it. His mind shifted gears with a smoothness that surprised even him. The anger was there now, but it had been compressed into something useful. "Annie," he said softly, "I need you to do something for me." Her eyes widened. "What?" "I need you to go find your dad," he said. "Tell him to stay where he is and wait for me." "Can you do that?" She hesitated. "What if they see me?" "They won't," Daniel said, with more certainty than he felt. "And if anyone asks, you tell them I asked you to." She searched his face, then nodded. "Okay, go," he said gently. "I'll be right here." She took a step, then stopped. "You won't go in?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. "I promise." Annie nodded once more and moved down the hallway, her small footsteps quiet against the polished floor. Daniel waited until she disappeared around the corner. Then he took out his phone. He didn't call security. He didn't call legal yet. First, he opened a secure recording app and placed the phone carefully near the door, close enough to catch what it could without being seen. Inside, a voice said, "Once he sits, we activate it." Daniel pressed record. He didn't feel like a victim. He felt like a witness, and for the first time since Annie had stopped him, he allowed himself to think not about how to save his position, but about how far this rot might spread. The door remained closed. The trap waited. So did Daniel. Daniel waited until the sound of Annie's footsteps faded completely before shifting his weight. The phone lay flat against the wall near the baseboard, its dark screen giving nothing away. He adjusted it once, carefully, angling the microphone toward the seam beneath the conference room door. Then he stepped back, hands empty, posture relaxed again. Anyone glancing down the hall would see a man waiting for a meeting to end, nothing more. Inside the room, the conversation continued without restraint. "They always underestimate how clean this is," a voice said. "No fingerprints, no intent, just words." Daniel recognized that voice instantly. He had defended that man in front of the board more times than he could count, had called him meticulous, principled, someone you could build a future with. Daniel's mouth tightened. Another voice responded, amused. We're not accusing him of anything illegal. We're letting him explain himself. On record. A pause. Then laughter. Daniel felt the sound of it settle into his chest like sediment. Heavy. Inescapable. He remembered his father's voice from years ago, long before boardrooms and stock options. You can survive being wrong, his father used to say. What you can't survive is trusting the wrong people twice. Daniel had trusted these people more than twice. Inside the room, someone cleared their throat. Once the recording circulates, the narrative writes itself. Founder loses control. Board steps in. Market breathes a sigh of relief. Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose. He thought of the conference ahead, the speeches he was meant to give, the investors he planned to reassure, the employees who would watch the live stream from break rooms and kitchen tables, believing that whatever happened at the top would somehow trickle down to them as security. None of them knew they were already being gambled with. A hand brushed his sleeve. Daniel's head turned sharply before he caught himself. Annie's father stood beside him, eyes wide, face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. He was still wearing his maintenance badge, the edges frayed, his hands bearing the permanent grime of someone who fixed things no one else wanted to touch. She said you wanted to see me, the man whispered. She's safe, Daniel said immediately. She did exactly what she needed to do. The man swallowed. She told me something bad was happening. Daniel nodded. She was right. The man's shoulders sagged, as if the confirmation cost him more than the uncertainty. I told her to keep her head down, he said quietly. I told her people don't like trouble. Daniel looked at him fully now. Your daughter didn't cause trouble, he said. She prevented it. The man hesitated. Sir, if this has anything to do with those people in there, it does, Daniel said. And I need your help. The man stiffened. I can't afford to lose this job. You won't, Daniel said without hesitation. Not today. Not because of this. The man studied Daniel's face, searching for exaggeration or reassurance. He seemed to find neither. Just certainty. I need to know, Daniel continued, lowering his voice further, how hard it would be to locate a device under that table without alerting anyone inside. The man's eyes flicked to the door. If it's where your daughter says, it wouldn't be hard, he said. But if they see me, they won't, Daniel said. Not yet. Inside the room, someone said, Where is he? He's never this late. Daniel checked his watch. 12 minutes now. He's probably stuck in traffic, another voice replied. Let him sweat. Daniel felt something cold settle into place. Can you do it? He asked. The man nodded slowly. If I have clearance. Daniel reached into his pocket and produced his access card, placing it gently in the man's palm. You have clearance, he said. The man looked down at the card, then back up. Sir, I don't want my daughter dragged into this. She won't be, Daniel said. But she will be remembered. That seemed to decide it. The man took a breath, squared his shoulders, and moved down the hallway toward the service entrance that led into the conference room from the side. Daniel watched him go, then returned his attention to the door. Inside, the conversation had shifted. He's pushing it, someone said. We should start without him. Good, another voice replied. The device is already live. Daniel's blood ran cold. He reached for his phone and checked the recording. The waveform danced steadily. Enough. More than enough. The door handle turned. Daniel straightened, every line of his body aligning into something calm and unreadable. The door opened halfway, and one of the executives leaned out, irritation already etched across his face. Daniel, he said, forcing a smile. There you are. We were just... Daniel raised a hand. Give me 1 minute, he said. His voice was level, almost gentle. I need to finish something first. The executive hesitated, then nodded, retreating back inside. The door closed again. Daniel didn't move. Seconds later, the side door opened quietly. Annie's father stepped out, his face pale but resolute. He held up a small black device no larger than a matchbox. a thin wire trailing from one end. Daniel felt his chest tighten. "Under the table," the man whispered. "Exactly where she said." Daniel nodded once. "Thank you. What happens now?" the man asked. Daniel took the device, weighing it in his palm. "Now," he said, "we stop pretending this is a misunderstanding." He slipped the device into his jacket pocket and checked his phone one last time. Then he reached for the door. This time, when he opened it, he did not hesitate. Daniel Wright stepped into the conference room as if nothing had changed. The conversation died mid-sentence. Every face turned toward him at once, familiar expressions arranged quickly into practiced neutrality. Polite smiles. Mild irritation masked as concern. The kind of looks people wore when they believed they were still in control of the narrative. "Sorry I'm late," Daniel said calmly, closing the door behind him. "Let's begin." He took his seat at the head of the table. The chair was exactly where it had always been. The leather still held the shape of his shoulders. The table surface gleamed under the lights, spotless, reflective, giving back carefully curated versions of everyone present. He rested his hands on the table, palms down. No one noticed the slight bulge beneath his jacket. "We were just discussing the agenda," one of the executives said smoothly. "Given the upcoming conference, we thought it would be wise to move straight to—" Daniel raised a finger. "Before we do," he said, "I want to address something." The room stilled. "This company," Daniel continued, "was built on trust. Not slogans. Not branding. Trust. The belief that people would do the right thing even when it wasn't convenient." A few heads nodded. Someone murmured agreement. Daniel let the silence stretch. "Trust," he went on, "is also the easiest thing to exploit." Yes. That earned a flicker of unease. One executive shifted in his seat. Another glanced briefly toward the center of the table, then looked away. Daniel noticed. He reached into his jacket and placed the small black device on the table. It made no sound, but the effect was immediate. Color drained from one face. Another executive's jaw tightened too quickly. Someone swallowed hard. Daniel watched them carefully, cataloging reactions the way he had learned to do long ago. "This was found under the table," he said quietly. "On my side." No one spoke. "Would anyone like to explain why there was an unauthorized recording device positioned to capture my voice?" he asked. A beat passed, then another. Finally, one man laughed, too loudly. "Daniel, come on. This has to be a misunderstanding. Maybe security." "I already checked," Daniel said. "Security didn't place it. Neither did legal. And maintenance only accessed the room because they were instructed to. He was whether." He paused, eyes sweeping the table. "By someone in this room." The laughter died. "Now," Daniel said, "before anyone speaks, understand this. Everything said in this meeting, prior to my arrival, has already been recorded." That did it. Chairs scraped back slightly. A woman straightened, face hardening. "You recorded us without consent?" Daniel tilted his head. "No. You did." Silence slammed down like a door. "You see," he continued evenly, "I was delayed this morning, long enough to hear quite a lot, including plans to manipulate voting rights, dilute ownership, and manufacture a narrative that would remove me from the company I founded." One man stood abruptly. "That's an outrageous accusation." "Sit down," Daniel said, not raising his voice. The man froze. Slowly, he sat. Daniel leaned back slightly. "I trusted you," he said. "That's on me. What you did with that trust is on you." A woman at the far end of the table spoke up, voice tight. "Daniel, if you're upset about governance strategy, we can discuss it privately." "This is not strategy," Daniel cut in. "This is betrayal." He reached for his phone and placed it face down on the table. Clause 14.3 of the shareholder agreement allows the founder to suspend executive authority in cases of coordinated action designed to undermine fiduciary duty. A murmur rippled through the room. "I've already contacted legal," Daniel continued. "By the time this meeting ends, your access will be restricted pending investigation." "You can't do this unilaterally," someone snapped. Daniel met his gaze. "Watch me." No one spoke after that. Daniel stood. The room seemed smaller with him on his feet. "You were confident," he said. "You were comfortable. You assumed I wouldn't notice. That assumption was your mistake." He picked up the device again, weighing it in his hand. This, he said, was meant to trap me. Instead, it revealed you. He turned toward the door. I'm taking a short recess, Daniel said. When I return, this company will begin correcting a failure that started long before today. He opened the door and stepped back into the hallway. Annie was there. She sat on the floor near the wall, knees pulled to her chest, backpack clutched tight. She looked up instantly when she saw him, eyes searching his face. It's okay, Daniel said softly, crouching in front of her. You were right, too. Her shoulders sagged with relief she hadn't allowed herself yet. They were mad, she whispered. I heard them earlier. They won't be mad at you, Daniel said. They won't touch you or your dad. He meant it. Annie hesitated. Did you go in? Yes. And? She asked. Daniel considered his answer. And now, he said, things are going to change. She nodded, accepting that in the way children sometimes accept truths too big to question. Come on, he said gently. Let's go find your dad. As they walked down the hallway together, Daniel felt something unfamiliar settle into him. Not relief, responsibility. And he knew, with a clarity that had nothing to do with boardrooms or power, that this story did not begin in that meeting room. It began with a child who refused to step aside. Daniel found Annie's father in the maintenance bay 2 floors below, standing beside an open server cabinet with his sleeves rolled up and a wrench frozen midair. He looked up sharply when he saw them approach, fear flashing across his face before he could hide it. Annie, he said first, relief breaking through. I told you to wait. I did, she said quickly. I waited. Then I listened. Her father's eyes flicked to Daniel, uncertain. Sir, I'm sorry if she caused. She didn't cause anything, Daniel said, cutting in gently. She prevented it. The man blinked. I don't understand. You will, Daniel replied. But first, I need you to know this. Your daughter is safe. Your job is safe. No one here will retaliate against either of you. The words landed cautiously, like something the man wanted to believe but had learned not to accept too quickly. My name is Marcus, he said finally. I fix what they don't want to think about. Cables, servers, dead zones. Daniel nodded. Then you already understand how rot spreads when no one checks beneath the surface. Marcus glanced at Annie. She stood very still now, eyes moving between the 2 men, absorbing more than either realized. They were planning to blame him, she said softly, as if explaining a simple truth. I heard them. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something hard had settled there. I've suspected things, he admitted. Irregular access logs. After-hours system pings that didn't line up with maintenance schedules. When I flagged it, I was told it was above my pay grade. Daniel felt the weight of that phrase press down on him. Above my pay grade. How many warnings had died there? Why didn't you push harder? Daniel asked, not accusing, just asking. Marcus looked at his daughter. Because I have her, he said simply, and because people who push too hard disappear quietly. Daniel absorbed that. He had built safeguards on paper, compliance frameworks, reporting channels, ethics committees. None of them mattered if fear outpaced trust. I'm going to ask you to do something difficult, Daniel said. And I need to know if you're willing. Marcus straightened. If it protects her, yes. It protects more than her, Daniel said. It protects everyone who works here and doesn't have the luxury of power. This, he explained quickly, the investigation, the temporary suspension of executive access, the need for someone who understood the company's systems from the inside out without being compromised by ambition. Marcus listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, he took a breath. You're asking me to step into the open, he said. That comes with a cost. Yes, Daniel said. And I won't pretend otherwise. But it also comes with authority. And backing. Marcus looked down at Annie. She nodded at him, small and certain. Okay, he said. I'll help. Daniel extended his hand. Marcus shook it, his grip firm but wary, like a man stepping onto unfamiliar ground. An hour later, the building felt different. Word traveled fast in corporate spaces, faster than official memos ever could. Executives were escorted out of secured areas with quiet efficiency. Access badges deactivated. Email accounts locked pending review. Meetings postponed. The hum of speculation rose like static. Daniel stood in his office for the first time that day. Jacket folded over the back of his chair, the recording device resting on his desk like an accusation that didn't need words. He stared out the window at the city below. He had always loved this view, the order of it, the sense that from enough distance, chaos arranged itself into something manageable. Behind him, the door opened softly. "Sir?" Marcus said. "Legal is on line 1. They've confirmed what you suspected." "This goes deeper." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "How deep?" "Deep enough that it didn't start today," Marcus replied. "And it won't end quietly." Daniel nodded. "Nothing worth fixing ever does." Marcus hesitated. "There's something else." Daniel turned. "Go on." "Annie," Marcus said. "She's worried she did something wrong." Daniel felt something twist in his chest. "Bring her in." End quote. Moments later, Annie stood in the doorway, her backpack still clutched tight. She looked smaller here, surrounded by glass and polished wood, as if the room itself might judge her. Daniel crouched in front of her again, slow and deliberate. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "But I stopped you," she said. "You said you were busy." "I was," Daniel replied. "And I was also about to make a very big mistake." She frowned. "Grown-ups make mistakes?" "All the time," he said. "The worst ones usually come from thinking we can't." She considered that. "Are you mad?" "No," Daniel said. "I'm grateful." Her shoulders relaxed just a little. "You listened," she said. "Yes," Daniel agreed. "Because you spoke." He stood and turned to Marcus. "Effective immediately," he said. "I want you overseeing system audits directly. You report to me. No intermediaries." Marcus stared. "Sir, that's necessary," Daniel finished. "And overdue." Marcus nodded slowly. "I won't let you down." "I know," Daniel said. "You already proved that." When they left, Daniel returned to his desk and sat for the first time since morning. He picked up the device again, turning it over in his hand. This wasn't just about an attempted coup. It was about a culture that had learned to look past people like Marcus, like Annie, about a system that mistook silence for consent. He opened his laptop and began drafting a message to the company. Not the polished version legal would later refine. The first one, the honest one. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, something fundamental had shifted, and Daniel Wright understood now that leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes, it was about stopping long enough to hear the smallest one. The email sat open on Daniel Wright's screen for several long minutes before he typed a single word. Outside his office, the building moved in low, restless currents. Phones rang and stopped ringing. Elevators chimed. Somewhere down the hall, a printer hummed steadily, unaware that the ground beneath it had shifted. Daniel listened to those ordinary sounds and realized how rarely he had done so before. He typed, "This morning, something happened that cannot be ignored." He stopped, deleted the sentence. Too vague, too safe. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on the ceiling. For years, his communication to the company had been filtered through strategy teams and legal review. Words sanded down until they were smooth enough to slide past resistance without friction. That approach had built stability. It had also built distance. Distance was how people like Marcus learned to keep quiet. It was how children learned to stay invisible. Daniel leaned forward again and began anew. "This morning, I was stopped outside a meeting by someone most of us would have walked past." He paused, considering the weight of that admission. Then he continued, slowly and deliberately, letting the words form without the usual instinct to manage perception. That pause prevented an act of betrayal that would have harmed this company and everyone who depends on it. He read the sentence twice. It felt exposed, honest, necessary. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," Daniel said without looking up. It was his chief of staff. Her expression carefully neutral, the way it always was when something significant was happening. "Legal has finalized the interim action plan," she said. "Executives involved will be placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Security is already executing." Daniel nodded. "Good." She hesitated. "There's concern about the message to employees. Rumors are spreading." They will," Daniel said. Silence would do more damage. She studied him for a moment. You want to send this yourself? Yes. She glanced at the screen.
You send the message yourself?
Without edits?
Yes.
Yes. She left without arguing. That alone told him how unusual the day had become. Daniel returned to the message. I want to be clear. This was not uncovered by a system, a policy, or a committee. It was uncovered because someone paid attention and chose courage over comfort. He stopped typing again. He thought of Annie's small hand raised in the hallway. The way her voice had shaken, not from uncertainty, but from the effort it took to be brave. He thought of how easily he could have dismissed her. How close he had come to doing exactly that. He continued, we often say integrity is a value here. Today, a 6-year-old showed us what that actually looks like. Daniel sat back, breath steady. He knew there would be discomfort, questions, pushback. Some would say it was inappropriate to involve a child in a corporate reckoning. Others would argue that naming this moment set a dangerous precedent. Let them. He added one final paragraph. If we are a company worth believing in, then we must be a company that listens not only to those with titles, but to those without power. Especially to those without power. He read the message from beginning to end. No flourish, no defensiveness, just truth. He hit send. The reply notifications began almost immediately. Some messages were brief. Thank you. About time. Proud to work here. Others were longer. Confessions. Stories of meetings where voices had been ignored. Of warnings dismissed. Of careers stalled because speaking up carried too much risk. Daniel read them all. An hour later, Marcus knocked and stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. He looked tired but alert, like someone who had been running on adrenaline and purpose. It is confirmed, Marcus said. The device wasn't the only one. There were 2 others in adjacent rooms. Same model, same install pattern. Daniel's jaw tightened. How long? At least 3 months, Marcus said. Possibly longer. Daniel absorbed that. 3 months of conversations captured, of trust compromised. Can we trace access? Daniel asked. Yes, Marcus said, but not without exposing some uncomfortable truths. Daniel met his gaze. Do it. Marcus nodded. There's something else. Daniel waited. Annie's been asking questions, Marcus said. About why people were lying. About why grown-ups need to hide things. Daniel exhaled slowly. What did you tell her? The truth, Marcus said. As much as a 6-year-old can understand. Daniel stood. Bring her up. Minutes later, Annie sat on the edge of the chair across from his desk, feet not quite reaching the floor. She looked around the office with quiet curiosity, her fear replaced by cautious interest. Did I get anyone in trouble? She asked. Daniel knelt in front of her, bringing himself level again. You didn't get anyone in trouble, he said. They did that themselves. She frowned. But they're mad. Some of them are, Daniel said. That happens when people are caught doing the wrong thing. Is my dad in trouble? She asked. No, Daniel said firmly. Your dad helped fix something important. She thought about that. Fixing is good, she said. Yes, Daniel agreed. It is. She looked at him seriously. Are you going to listen more now? The question hit harder than any accusation. Yes, Daniel said after a moment. I am. She nodded, satisfied, and slid off the chair to stand beside her father. When they left, Daniel returned to his desk, but he did not sit. He stood by the window instead, watching the late afternoon light stretch across the city. He thought of the conference ahead, the questions he would face, the explanations he would have to give. He welcomed them. For the first time in a long while, Daniel Wright felt aligned with the reason he had started all of this in the first place. Not to win, not to dominate, but to build something that didn't require silence to survive. And he knew this was only the beginning. The people who had planned his removal would not disappear quietly. There would be lawyers, statements, counter-narratives, attempts to reframe what had happened as overreaction or misunderstanding. But Daniel was no longer interested in comfort. He was interested in clarity. And clarity, he was learning, often arrived from the most unexpected places. By the next morning, the building no longer whispered. It hummed. Daniel arrived early, not out of urgency but intention. The lobby lights were still warming up, casting a soft amber glow across the polished floor. Security nodded as he passed, their expressions subtly different now, more attentive, less performative. He noticed these things. He was noticing everything. The night had not been quiet. Emails from board members had come in waves, some cautious, some alarmed, a few openly hostile. Attorneys had requested calls to clarify context. One former executive had already leaked a carefully worded statement to the press, framing the suspensions as temporary governance disagreements. Daniel had read it without expression. The truth, he knew, did not rush. It waited. In his office, Marcus was already there, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, eyes sharp behind the fatigue. The screen behind him glowed with access logs and timestamps. They didn't just listen, Marcus said without preamble. They curated. Daniel set his coffee down untouched. Explain. The recordings, Marcus continued. They weren't raw. They were reviewed, clipped, tagged. Whoever was doing this planned to use selective excerpts to build a case. Not criminal reputational. Daniel nodded slowly. Enough to force the board's hand. Exactly, Marcus said. Paint you as unstable. Volatile. Say the founder had become a liability. Iris. Daniel felt a familiar anger rise, then settle. He had been in rooms where men like that spoke about others as if they were already gone. He had never imagined himself as the subject. Who else knew? Daniel asked. Marcus tapped a key. Names populated the screen. Mid-level executives. Legal liaisons. A communications consultant Daniel vaguely remembered approving years ago. They created layers, Marcus said, so no one could claim full responsibility. Daniel leaned back. Cowardice scales well. Marcus allowed himself a thin smile. It does. A knock came at the door. Daniel didn't turn. Come in. It was the head of corporate communications, her posture rigid, her tablet clutched tightly. We have a situation, she said. The press is asking about the child. Daniel turned slowly. What child? The one mentioned in your email, she said. Someone leaked it. They're speculating, asking whether a minor was involved in a security breach. Well, Marcus stiffened. Daniel stood. No child was involved in wrongdoing, he said. A child spoke the truth. She hesitated. They're framing it as recklessness, as emotional decision-making. Of course they are, Daniel said calmly. That's easier than accountability. He walked to the window, looking down at the street below. Parents walking children to school. A man pushing a coffee cart. A woman waiting at the crosswalk, scrolling through her phone. Lives unfolding without knowing how close a few decisions had come to affecting them. Prepare a statement, Daniel said. No names, no details. Just this. The company is grateful for integrity wherever it appears, and retaliation will not be tolerated. She nodded, relieved to have direction, and left. Marcus exhaled. They'll keep circling. I know, Daniel said. That's fine. There was another knock. Softer this time. Annie stood in the doorway, her backpack zipped, her hair freshly braided. She looked smaller in the morning light, as if yesterday had required more of her than today would allow. Hi, she said. Hi, Daniel replied, crouching automatically. My dad said I could say thank you, she said, for listening. Daniel smiled faintly. I should be thanking you. She considered that. You did listen, she said. Most people don't. I'm learning, Daniel said. She glanced around the office. Is this where you decide things? Sometimes, he said. But not always. She nodded, satisfied, and turned to leave. Then she stopped. Are they still lying? She asked. Daniel paused. Some of them are trying, he said honestly. But lies don't work very well once the truth is heard. She smiled at that, a small, genuine smile. Then she left. Daniel watched the door close behind her. Marcus cleared his throat. She's perceptive. She had to be, Daniel said. That's what happens when adults forget to lower their voices. The day moved forward with deliberate speed. Meetings were canceled. Others were reshaped. Daniel spoke with board members one by one, not to defend himself, but to lay out facts. He offered evidence. He offered time. He offered nothing resembling compromise. By afternoon, the narrative began to shift. Not publicly yet, But internally, people spoke more carefully. Some spoke for the first time. An assistant sent Daniel an anonymous message thanking him for making it safe to breathe again. A facilities supervisor wrote about warnings he'd raised years earlier that went nowhere. A junior analyst admitted she'd once been told to stay in her lane when she questioned a suspicious transfer. Daniel read every word. He felt the weight of it, not pride, not vindication, but responsibility. Late in the day, Marcus returned with a final update. "Legal confirms we can proceed," he said. "But once we do, there's no turning back." Daniel looked at the city again, now washed in late afternoon gold. "Good," he said. "We're done pretending this was an isolated incident." He picked up his phone and drafted a single message to the board. "This investigation will continue, not to punish, but to correct. If that makes anyone uncomfortable, they should ask themselves why." He sent it without hesitation. That evening, as the building slowly emptied, Daniel remained. Not working, thinking. He thought about Annie's question. Are they still lying? Yes, some were, but others were finally telling the truth, and that mattered more, because systems didn't fail all at once. They failed quietly, in moments when no one listened, and Daniel Wright had learned too late. But not irreversibly, that leadership began not with authority, but with attention. The first lawsuit threat arrived just after noon. Daniel was in the smaller conference room with Marcus and two attorneys when his phone vibrated against the table. He glanced at the screen, read the sender's name, and felt no surprise at all. "They've retained outside counsel," one of the attorneys said, watching his expression. "Preemptive posture, aggressive language. They'll claim wrongful suspension, reputational harm, breach of contract." Daniel set the phone down. "They're scared," he said. "That's new for them." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Fear makes people sloppy." "Yes," Daniel replied. "And honest. Sometimes, if we're patient." Patience had never been Daniel's strongest skill. He had built his career on decisiveness, on moving before hesitation could calcify into doubt. But the past 24 hours had taught him something sharper than speed. They had taught him the value of restraint. The attorneys outlined next steps: injunctions, preservation orders, media strategy. Daniel listened, asked precise questions, approved the necessary actions. Then he dismissed them. When the door closed, the room felt quieter, almost human again. "You okay?" Marcus asked. Daniel nodded. "I'm thinking about what comes after." Marcus studied him. "After the investigation? After the reckoning," Daniel said. "Those are not the same thing." He stood and walked to the window. Below, the street pulsed with ordinary life. Delivery trucks idled. A group of construction workers ate lunch on the curb, laughing at something Daniel couldn't hear. He wondered how many of them had been recorded without consent in some other office, in some other building, by people who assumed power protected them. "Culture doesn't change because people are removed," Daniel said. "It changes because people believe removal is possible." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then you'll need allies." "I already have some," Daniel said. Thinking of Annie without saying her name, there was a knock at the door. This time, it wasn't hesitation or crisis that entered the room. It was presence. Elaine Porter stepped in, her posture straight, her gray hair pulled back neatly, her expression unreadable in the way only someone with decades of experience could manage. She had been on the board longer than anyone else, longer than Daniel. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the chair. "Of course," Daniel said. She sat. "I wanted to speak before rumors harden into positions." Daniel appreciated that. "Go on. You've disrupted something," Elaine said. "Some people are calling it reckless. Others are calling it overdue." "And you?" Daniel asked. She met his gaze steadily. "I'm calling it a test." Daniel waited. "For years," Elaine continued, "this company has said the right things: ethics, transparency, accountability. But when those values became inconvenient, they were deferred. You exposed that." Daniel felt no pride in the statement, only recognition. "There will be pressure," Elaine said, "to minimize, to isolate the problem to a few bad actors, to move on." "I won't," Daniel said. "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm here." She leaned forward slightly. You're going to need the board's support to go further, not just legally, symbolically, and you won't get it by force. Daniel nodded. I'm listening. Elaine studied him for a long moment. Then listen to this. If you want people to speak up, you must protect the smallest voice first. Not publicly, institutionally. Daniel thought of Annie again, of her father, of the countless others who had learned to stay quiet. What are you suggesting? He asked. Elaine smiled faintly. Formalize what happened yesterday. Not the incident, the principle. Daniel's interest sharpened. Go on. A protected channel, she said. Independent oversight, guaranteed anonymity, and consequences that don't disappear into committees. Daniel felt something align in him. A system that listens. Yes, Elaine said. Because courage shouldn't depend on age, position, or luck. Daniel exhaled slowly. I should have done this years ago. Elaine's expression softened. Most people realize that too late. You didn't. After she left, Daniel sat alone for several minutes, letting the weight of her words settle. He opened a new document and began outlining what such a system might look like. Not polished, not perfect, just real. Later that afternoon, he found Annie again in the cafeteria, sitting at a table with her father, swinging her legs as she ate an apple. She looked up when she saw him and waved, unself-conscious. Did you fix it? She asked. Not all of it, Daniel said honestly, sitting across from them. But we're working on it. Her father watched him carefully. People are talking, he said. Some of them aren't happy. Daniel nodded. That means it matters. Annie tilted her head. Does fixing always make people mad? Sometimes, Daniel said. Especially if they liked things broken. She considered that, then shrugged and took another bite of her apple. Daniel smiled. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the building began to empty again, Daniel returned to his office and reviewed the day's messages one last time. Among them was a short note, unsigned. I've been waiting for someone to listen for a long time. Thank you. Daniel closed his laptop and stood. The reckoning was only beginning. Lawsuits would come. Headlines would distort. Allies would falter. But something irreversible had already happened. The smallest voice had been heard, and the system, once cracked, would never sound the same again. The headline broke before sunrise. Daniel saw it on his phone while the coffee brewed, the glow of the screen cutting through the quiet of his kitchen. Founder under fire as company probes internal recording scheme. He read the article once, then again, slower. The language was careful but pointed. Words like controversial, unorthodox, and emotionally driven appeared more than once. There was no mention of illegal surveillance, no mention of the device under the table, no mention of the attempt to manufacture evidence. There was, however, a paragraph devoted to the child. Sources say a minor may have been present during sensitive corporate operations, raising questions about judgment at the highest level. Daniel set the phone down. He had known this was coming. The first counterattack was always narrative, not substance. If they could frame him as reckless, they wouldn't have to answer for being corrupt. He poured the coffee, took a sip, and felt nothing. By the time he reached the office, the building was already awake in a way it hadn't been the day before. Security was tighter. Conversations stopped when he passed. Not out of fear, out of recalibration. People were reassessing where the lines actually were now. In his office, Marcus waited with a tablet in hand, jaw set. They're coordinating, Marcus said without preamble. 3 former executives, same law firm, same media consultant. They're pushing the child endangerment angle hard. Daniel loosened his tie. Because it's cleaner than admitting conspiracy. Yes, Marcus said. And because it puts you on defense. Daniel nodded. We won't take the bait. Marcus hesitated. There's something else. Daniel looked up. Go on. They're trying to find her, Marcus said. Annie. They don't have her name yet, but they're asking questions. Facilities. HR. Anyone who might talk. Okay. The word find landed heavier than Daniel expected. That stops now, he said. I've already restricted access, Marcus replied. But we should assume pressure will increase. Daniel thought of Annie's quiet certainty. of the way she had stood her ground without knowing how much ground there was to lose. They don't get to turn her into a tactic, Daniel said. We protect her. Fully. Marcus nodded. Already in motion, a knock came at the door. Elaine Porter entered, expression tight but controlled. We need to talk, she said. Daniel gestured to the chair. I assumed we would. She sat. The board is split. About? Daniel asked, though he already knew. About you, she said. Some believe you've gone too far. Others believe you haven't gone far enough. Daniel almost smiled. That sounds about right. Elaine did not return the smile. There's concern that this will become personal, that your judgment is compromised. Dear. Daniel met her gaze steadily. Is it? Elaine held his eyes for a long moment. No, she said finally. But perception is a weapon, and they're using it well. Daniel leaned back. Then we respond with facts. Not outrage. Elaine nodded. Good. Because there's a vote coming. Not to remove you. Not yet. But to limit your authority during the investigation. Daniel absorbed that. And you? I haven't decided, she said honestly. Convince me. Daniel stood and walked to the window. He watched a city bus pull up, passengers stepping on and off, unnoticed. Essential. When I started this company, he said, I believed systems could replace vigilance. That if you built enough structure, integrity would take care of itself. Elaine listened. I was wrong. Daniel continued. Systems don't listen. People do. And people stop listening when they believe no one is listening to them. He turned back to her. This isn't about a child in a hallway. It's about every person who learned that silence was safer than truth. Elaine studied him. That's not a legal argument. No, Daniel said. It's a moral one. She stood. Morality doesn't win board votes. Then let's talk consequences. Daniel replied. If you sideline me now, you signal that power protects itself when challenged. If you don't, you signal that this company means what it says. Elaine considered that. You're asking people to choose discomfort. Yes, Daniel said, because comfort is what got us here. She exhaled slowly. I'll take that with me. After she left, Daniel sat alone for a long time. By midday, the pressure intensified. Requests for comment. Demands for clarification. A shareholder threatened to pull funding if instability continued. Another quietly expressed support, asking only that Daniel hold the line. He did. In the afternoon, Marcus returned, face grave. They found her school, he said. Daniel's chest tightened. How? Public records, Marcus said. Nothing illegal, but the intent is clear. Daniel stood immediately. We move her, today. It's already arranged, Marcus said. Temporary housing, security, discretion. Daniel nodded once, grateful beyond words. Later, as dusk settled over the city, Daniel found himself in the hallway again. The same one where everything had begun. It looked unchanged, polished, quiet, deceptively ordinary. Annie stood there with her backpack, her father beside her. A security officer waited a respectful distance away. Are we in trouble? Annie asked when she saw him. Daniel knelt in front of her. No, he said. You're being protected. Because I talked? She asked. Yes, Daniel said. And because some people don't like being heard. She thought about that. That's silly, she said. He smiled, despite everything. It is. Her father cleared his throat. Sir, we don't want special treatment. Daniel looked up at him. This isn't special, he said. It's necessary. Annie tugged on Daniel's sleeve. Are you okay? She asked. He hesitated, then answered honestly. I'm being tested. She nodded solemnly. Tests are hard, she said. But you learn things. Yes, Daniel said quietly. You do. As they walked away, Daniel remained in the hallway, alone with the echo of her words. The fight was no longer about who controlled the company. It was about what kind of company it was allowed to be. And Daniel Wright understood now that some tests didn't come with right answers, only the chance to choose who you were when the pressure came. The board meeting convened at 4 o'clock sharp. Daniel entered the room alone. No advisors, no lawyers, no prepared statements printed on heavy paper. just a tablet under his arm, and the quiet steadiness that had replaced anger sometime during the night. The long oval table gleamed under recessed lights. Familiar faces arranged along its curve, some wary, some guarded, some openly strained. Elaine Porter sat near the center, hands folded, eyes on him. Daniel took his seat. "Let's begin," Elaine said. "This session is closed." No recording. A few heads turned instinctively, as if checking for devices that were no longer there. Daniel noticed. "The purpose of this meeting," Elaine continued, "is to determine whether the current investigation requires a temporary limitation of executive authority." Daniel nodded once. "Understood." One of the board members cleared his throat. "Daniel, before we proceed, I want to say this is unprecedented. The market response, the press, the uncertainty." Daniel didn't interrupt. "And the involvement of a minor," the man continued. "It complicates matters. It reveals matters," Daniel replied calmly. The man bristled. "That's a matter of opinion." "No," Daniel said. "It's a matter of sequence. She spoke before I acted. That distinction matters." A woman at the far end leaned forward. "What matters is perception. Investors are uneasy. They're asking whether you allowed emotion to override governance." Daniel met her gaze. "I allowed information to override assumption." Silence followed. Elaine interjected. "Daniel, perhaps you can walk us through your decision-making. Not the event itself, the reasoning." Daniel rested his hands on the table. "I was stopped outside a meeting. I listened. I heard evidence of coordinated action to undermine fiduciary duty. I verified it. I acted within my authority." "I see. And the child?" someone pressed. Daniel didn't flinch. "She was not a decision-maker. She was a messenger." "That's a dangerous precedent," another voice said. "So is ignoring a warning because of who delivers it," Daniel replied. A murmur rippled through the room. One board member shook his head. "You're asking us to endorse a narrative that makes us look reactive." "I'm asking you to endorse reality," Daniel said. "Reactive would have been walking into that room and speaking into a device designed to destroy my credibility." Elaine raised a hand. "Let's focus. The question before us is whether Daniel's actions compromised the company or preserved it." She looked directly at him. "Daniel, do you believe your judgment is impaired?" Daniel considered the question carefully. He thought of Annie's voice, of Marcus's hesitation, of the emails from employees who had waited years for someone to listen. "No," he said. "I believe my judgment is clearer than it's been in a long time." Elaine nodded slowly. "Then answer this. If the warning had come from a junior analyst instead of a child, would we be having this conversation?" No one answered. "That," Elaine said quietly, "is the problem." A man near the end of the table scoffed. "We can't build governance around hypotheticals. Then build it around consequences," Daniel said, "because hypotheticals are how misconduct hides. In plays." He tapped his tablet and slid it forward. "You have the evidence. The recordings. The access logs. The legal analysis. I won't summarize it for you." The room filled with the soft sounds of scrolling and shifting posture. After a moment, someone spoke. "If we limit your authority now, the market stabilizes." "And the message?" Daniel asked. "That leadership is accountable," the man replied. Daniel nodded. "Accountable to whom?" The man hesitated. "To the board." Daniel leaned forward. "And who is the board accountable to?" Silence again. Elaine closed her folder. "I think we're circling," she said. "Let's vote." Daniel sat back, heart steady. He had prepared himself for either outcome. What mattered now was consistency. Elaine looked around the table. "All in favor of limiting executive authority pending investigation." Hands rose. Not many, but enough to matter. "All opposed." More hands rose this time. Elaine counted silently, then looked up. "The motion fails." And a breath Daniel hadn't realized he was holding released slowly. Elaine continued. "However, this board will require quarterly updates on the investigation and the implementation of new oversight mechanisms." "Agreed," Daniel said immediately. Elaine met his eyes. "And Daniel, protect the child. At all costs." He nodded. "I already am." The meeting adjourned without ceremony. Outside, The late afternoon light stretched long shadows across the hallway. Daniel walked alone, the weight of the decision settling into something quieter than relief. This wasn't a victory. It was permission to continue. His phone buzzed. Marcus. It's done? Marcus asked. Yes, Daniel said. For now. Good, Marcus replied. Because there's more. Daniel stopped walking. How much more? Marcus hesitated. Enough that the device wasn't the endgame. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Tell me. They were preparing a secondary narrative, Marcus said. If the recording failed, they planned to accuse you of targeting whistleblowers. Daniel exhaled. Irony travels fast. There's also a shell entity, Marcus added. Quiet. Clean. Designed to siphon assets post-removal. Daniel opened his eyes. Then we keep going. Yes, Marcus said. And Daniel? Yes. Annie asked if she could go back to school. Daniel felt something soften. Can she? Not yet, Marcus said. But soon, Daniel nodded. Tell her we're working on it. Oh, that evening, Daniel returned to his office long after most of the building had emptied. He stood by the window again. City lights flickering on like constellations arranged by human hands. He thought of the question that had been asked in the boardroom about emotion, about judgment. He understood now that the opposite of emotion wasn't logic, it was indifference. And indifference was what allowed systems to rot. He picked up his tablet and opened a new document titled simply, Listening. It would take time. It would take resistance. It would take choices that cost him comfort and allies. But it would be worth it. Because somewhere, a 6-year-old was waiting to return to a normal life. And Daniel Wright intended to make sure she could without having to be brave again. Night settled into the building with a different kind of quiet. Not the hollow silence of after-hours emptiness, but a watchful stillness, as if the walls themselves were paying attention now. Daniel remained in his office, jacket draped over the chair, sleeves rolled up, the city lights reflected faintly in the glass behind his desk. The document titled Listening was still open on his tablet. He hadn't written much, just fragments, ideas without polish, anonymous reporting without retaliation, independent oversight outside executive control, protection before exposure, truth before narrative. He stared at the words, knowing how easily they could become slogans instead of safeguards. His phone buzzed. Marcus again. We found the shell entity, Marcus said without preamble. It's dormant. No transactions yet. But the paperwork is airtight. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Who controls it? A trust, Marcus replied. Multiple layers, but the signatures trace back to the same 3 executives. Daniel nodded slowly. They were building an escape hatch. Yes, Marcus said. And a weapon. Then we treat it as such. Daniel replied. Document everything. Quietly, there was a pause on the line. Daniel, Marcus said carefully. This will get uglier. I know. Daniel said. That means we're close. After the call ended, Daniel leaned back and let the chair creak beneath his weight. He thought of all the times he'd mistaken calm for health, order for integrity, silence for agreement. The door knocked softly. He looked up. Come in. Elaine Porter stepped inside, coat over her arm, her expression tired but intent. I thought you might still be here. I usually am, Daniel said. She smiled faintly. That's part of the problem. He gestured to the chair. What brings you back? Elaine sat, crossing her legs slowly. I wanted to say this privately. Today's vote wasn't just about authority. It was about fear. Daniel waited. Some of them are afraid of what you've started, she continued. Not because it's wrong, because it can't be controlled once it spreads. Daniel nodded. Truth rarely stays contained. Elaine studied him. You're going to lose people. I already have, Daniel said. I just didn't know it yet. She considered that. There's something else. The child. Daniel stiffened slightly. What about her? Elaine held his gaze. Do not let her become a symbol. Daniel frowned. She already is. Only if you allow others to frame her that way, Elaine said. Protect her privacy. Her ordinariness. Let her disappear back into being a child. Daniel exhaled slowly. That's all I want. Elaine stood. Good. Because if this turns into mythology, the lesson gets lost. After she left, Daniel remained still for a long moment. Ordinariness. He thought of Annie swinging her legs in the cafeteria. apple in hand, of her asking questions not to challenge authority, but to understand it. She didn't want to be brave. She had just refused to be silent. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. She keeps asking when things will be normal again. I don't know what to tell her. Daniel typed back without hesitation. Tell her the truth. That normal takes time. But it's coming. A reply followed quickly. Thank you. Daniel set the phone down. The next morning brought rain. It streaked the windows in uneven lines, blurring the skyline into something softer, less certain. Daniel arrived early again. But this time, he didn't go straight to his office. He walked the floors. He stopped by facilities, by security, by the break room, where night shift workers drank their coffee in near silence. Some looked up, startled. Others nodded cautiously. Daniel didn't give speeches. He asked questions. What do you need? What slows you down? Who don't you feel safe disagreeing with? At first, answers were guarded. Then, gradually, they loosened. A maintenance worker admitted he'd once been told not to log an after-hours access request. A junior manager confessed she'd been warned off escalating concerns because it made waves. A security guard said quietly that he'd seen executives treat staff differently depending on how they dressed. Daniel listened, not with a notebook, not with a strategy in mind, just listened. By midday, the press cycle had shifted slightly. Still critical, still sharp, but cracks appeared. An anonymous source confirmed the existence of illegal surveillance. Another hinted at deeper financial misconduct. The narrative was no longer one-sided. In the afternoon, Marcus entered Daniel's office holding a printed document. We have confirmation, he said. Federal interest. Daniel didn't react immediately. When? Soon, Marcus said, quietly. For now. Daniel nodded. Good. Marcus hesitated. You okay with that? Yes, Daniel said. Sunlight works best when it's earned. As evening approached, Daniel received one last message. It was from Annie's father. She fell asleep asking if the bad men were gone. Daniel closed his eyes. What do I tell her? The message continued. Daniel typed slowly. Tell her some people are learning, and some are being stopped, and that she did her part. He added a second line after a pause. And tell her she doesn't have to do anything else. The typing indicator blinked, then stopped. Thank you. Daniel stood and walked to the window one last time that day. Rain still fell, washing the city in muted reflections. Somewhere out there, a little girl slept, unaware of how many lives she had altered simply by refusing to step aside. Daniel understood now that this wasn't about saving a company. It was about restoring the idea that truth didn't require permission, and that silence, once broken, never quite returned to what it had been. The federal agents arrived without insignia. No flashing lights, no dramatic entrances. Just two people in plain coats walking through the lobby as if they belonged there, which, Daniel realized, they did now. Power rarely announced itself when it was confident. Marcus met them first. Daniel watched from the glass wall of his office as hands were shaken, credentials shown briefly, then tucked away. The agents spoke quietly, their posture relaxed, almost conversational. That unsettled him more than aggression ever could. They were here to listen. When Marcus led them in, Daniel stood. Mr. Wright, the older of the two said, extending a hand. Thank you for making yourself available. Thank you for coming, Daniel replied. I wish it were under better circumstances. The agent smiled thinly. Circumstances are rarely good when they're honest. They sat. The questions were precise, not accusatory. Timelines, access, names, systems. Daniel answered without embellishment, letting Marcus fill in technical gaps when needed. The younger agent typed steadily, barely looking up. What prompted you to initiate the internal review? The older agent asked. Daniel paused. A warning, he said, that I chose not to ignore. The agent nodded. From an employee? Yes. He did not say more. And the recording devices? The agent continued. Were they operational? Yes, Marcus answered. And curated. If you freed that earned a raised eyebrow. Daniel added quietly. They were meant to remove me without touching the company, cleanly. The agent leaned back. People who believe they're indispensable often underestimate how much evidence they leave behind. After an hour, the agent stood. We'll be in touch, the older one said. Quietly, Daniel nodded. That's all I ask. When the door closed, Marcus let out a breath he'd clearly been holding. That went, well, OD Apseed. As well as it could, Daniel said. They're thorough. They always are, Marcus replied. That's what scares people. Daniel looked out at the hallway, empty now. It should. The next day, the conference was officially postponed. Publicly, it was framed as a scheduling adjustment. Privately, it was a concession. The board had agreed that no grand vision speech should happen while the foundation was still cracking. Daniel accepted the decision without protest. Some ideas needed time to breathe before they were spoken. In the absence of spectacle, something quieter took shape. The listening framework was announced internally, not as a press release, not as a keynote, as a memo, written in plain language, co-signed by Daniel and Elaine Porter. It outlined protections, processes, independent oversight, consequences that did not vanish into committees. Most importantly, it promised one thing without caveat. Retaliation would end careers, not warnings, not retraining, endings. The reaction was immediate and uneven. Some applauded, others stayed silent. A few resigned quietly within days, citing personal reasons. Daniel let them go without comment. Not every departure was a loss. Midweek, Daniel received a message from a mid-level manager he barely recognized. I reported something 3 years ago. Nothing happened. I stopped trying. I'm ready to try again. Daniel responded himself. I'm listening. That evening, Marcus found Daniel in the cafeteria again. Annie wasn't there. Neither was her father. The table where they'd sat was empty, wiped clean, waiting for someone else's ordinary lunch. They moved her, Marcus said quietly. Different district. Temporary. Daniel nodded. Is she okay? She's adjusting, Marcus said. As much as a kid can. Daniel stared at the empty chair. Good. There was a pause. She asked something, Marcus added. Daniel looked up. What? Whether telling the truth always makes things worse before they get better. Daniel considered that carefully. What did you say? Marcus shrugged. I said yes, but that better doesn't come without it. Daniel smiled faintly. You told her the truth. Marcus nodded. She seemed to like that. The lawsuits progressed predictably. Statements, counterstatements. Motions designed more to exhaust than to win. Daniel let legal handle the mechanics. His attention stayed elsewhere. He walked more, listened more, spoke less. When he did speak, it was deliberate. At a small internal gathering, no cameras, no press, Daniel stood before a group of employees from departments that rarely shared the same room. Facilities, security, junior analysts, assistants. I won't pretend trust is restored, he said. Trust isn't a switch. It's a practice. He paused, letting that land. You don't owe this company loyalty, Daniel continued. You owe yourself integrity. If those align, stay. If they don't, leave without guilt. Someone asked quietly, what if we speak up and nothing happens again? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then I've failed, he said, and you should hold me to that. Silence followed, not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. That night, alone in his office, Daniel reread the earliest emails from the investigation, the ones that hadn't made headlines, the ones that would never be quoted, stories of being overlooked, of being warned to stay quiet, of watching small compromises pile into something unrecognizable. He realized then that Annie's warning hadn't just stopped a meeting, it had interrupted a pattern. Late Friday afternoon, Daniel received a final message from Elaine Porter. The board is aligned, not unanimously, but firmly enough. Daniel replied with a single word, good. As he shut down his computer and prepared to leave, Daniel paused by the window one last time that week. The city was clear tonight. No rain, just lights and movement and lives continuing. Somewhere else, a child was learning a new classroom, new routines, new ways to be ordinary again. Daniel hoped she never had to be brave like that again. And if the systems he was building worked the way they should, she wouldn't, because the goal was never to create heroes. It was to make courage unnecessary. The first arrest warrant was sealed, but the rumor reached Daniel before the ink dried. It came through Marcus, who stood in the doorway with an expression Daniel had learned to read over the past weeks, not alarmed, not relieved, but resolved. "They're moving," Marcus said, quietly. "Financial Crimes Division. 2 names for now. More coming." Daniel nodded. Good. It wasn't satisfaction he felt. It was gravity. Once the machinery of accountability began to turn, it did not stop cleanly. It ground forward, indifferent to reputations, unmoved by past favors. "Press won't know until Monday," Marcus added. "They'll frame it as routine." Daniel allowed himself a brief, humorless smile. "There's nothing routine about this." "No," Marcus agreed. "But routine makes it easier to swallow." That evening, Daniel drove himself home for the first time in weeks. No driver, no security car trailing behind. Just traffic, red lights, and the familiar irritation of a city that didn't care who you were once you sat behind a steering wheel. He welcomed that. At a stoplight, he noticed a man holding a cardboard sign near the median. The sign was simple. No slogans. No accusations. Just 4 words written in uneven black marker, trying to start over. Daniel watched as car after car passed without slowing. He reached into his wallet, hesitated, then rolled down the window and handed the man a bill. "Thank you," the man said quietly, eyes meeting his. Daniel nodded, light turning green. As he drove on, the image stayed with him. Starting over. The phrase had followed him lately, sometimes uninvited. He wondered how many people in his company wanted that chance and had never been given it. The next morning, the arrest became official. No press conference, no spectacle, just a filing that triggered a chain reaction. Legal teams scrambled. Phones rang, unanswered. One former executive's house was searched before sunrise, neighbors peering from behind curtains as if watching a storm pass too close. By noon, the stock dipped, then steadied. Investors hated uncertainty, but they hated rot more. Daniel spent the morning on calls, not defending himself, not managing panic, but explaining process, over and over, to people who had never needed to hear it before. "This is not a purge," he said more than once. "It's a correction." Some accepted that, others did not. He made notes, quietly recalibrating who understood the difference. In the afternoon, Elaine Porter requested a walk, not a meeting. A walk. They left the building through a side exit and crossed into the small public park across the street. It was nothing special. A few benches, a patch of grass, trees that struggled against pollution and neglect. Elaine sat first. "You remember when this park was worse?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Barely usable. People complained," Elaine said. "City studied it. Committees formed. Nothing changed." "And then?" Daniel asked. "A janitor who worked nights nearby started cleaning it on his breaks," she said. "No authority, no budget, just care." Others joined in. The city followed later. Daniel smiled faintly. "You're saying systems follow behavior." Elaine looked at him. "I'm saying leadership is contagious." They sat in silence for a moment, watching a young mother push a stroller along the path. "The board will back you," Elaine said finally. Not unanimously, but decisively enough. Daniel nodded. "And the cost?" Elaine didn't hesitate. "You'll never be comfortable again." Daniel let out a quiet breath. "I think I've made peace with that." She stood. "Good, because comfort is a poor measure of success." Back at the office, Daniel found a message waiting. It was from Annie's father. She started at the new school today. She was scared. Then she made a friend. "She wanted me to tell you that." Daniel stared at the screen longer than necessary. "Tell her I'm proud of her," he typed, "and that making a friend is a bigger victory than anything I did." A reply came a few minutes later. She smiled when I read that. "Thank you." Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. The following days blurred into motion. Depositions scheduled. Internal reviews expanded. The listening framework tested in real time. Strained by volume but holding. Not perfectly, but holding. One afternoon, Daniel received an anonymous report through the new channel. It was short, precise. "They asked me to delete an email chain last year. I didn't. I still have it." Daniel forwarded it to Marcus with a single note. "Proceed carefully." Another message followed later. "I stayed silent when I shouldn't have." I'm ready now, Daniel replied as he had before. I'm listening. By the end of the week, the narrative had shifted again. Not because of spin, because of accumulation. Too many stories, too much corroboration, too much evidence to dismiss as coincidence. A columnist who had criticized Daniel sharply on day one published a retraction, not an apology, but an acknowledgement. Perhaps, the piece concluded, this is what accountability actually looks like when it isn't cosmetic. Daniel read it without satisfaction. Vindication was loud. Change was quiet. On Friday evening, Daniel stood alone in the same hallway where Annie had stopped him weeks earlier. It looked identical. Polished floor, neutral art, soft lighting designed to soothe. He stood there long enough that a passerby slowed, uncertain whether to interrupt. Daniel smiled politely and stepped aside. The hallway did not know what had happened there. That was as it should be, because the goal had never been to mark the place. It had been to change what happened after. As Daniel turned toward the exit, his phone buzzed one last time. A message from Marcus. More names coming. But the system's working, Daniel typed back. Then it was worth it. Outside, the city breathed on. Indifferent and alive. Daniel stepped into it without ceremony, carrying with him the quiet understanding that real justice rarely arrived with applause. It arrived with persistence, with listening, and sometimes with a child brave enough to say stop. The letter arrived on thick paper, unmarked, except for a return address Daniel recognized instantly. It was handwritten. He noticed that first the deliberate choice to slow the message down, to make it impossible to skim. He didn't open it immediately. He set it on his desk and finished the call he was on. Listening to a compliance officer explain safeguards that would have sounded revolutionary a month ago and now sounded merely necessary. When the call ended, the office felt unusually quiet. Daniel broke the seal. Daniel, right? I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you should. But after everything that's happened, I need to say something without lawyers in the room. He exhaled slowly and continued. I spent 20 years believing power was something you guarded. Something you used before someone used it on you. That belief made me successful. It also made me blind. Daniel didn't need to see the signature yet. He already knew who had written it. I convinced myself that what we were doing was strategy. That the company would survive. That people always do. I never allowed myself to picture the faces attached to the numbers. That was easier. His jaw tightened. Then a child spoke up. Daniel paused there, letting the sentence breathe. I watched the news coverage. I read the internal memos. I listened to people I used to intimidate, speak freely for the first time, and I realized something too late to undo. Power doesn't come from control. It comes from accountability. I didn't have it. You did. The letter ended without an apology. Just a name, one of the arrested executives. Daniel folded the paper carefully and placed it back in the envelope. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel anger. He felt the dull weight of inevitability. Some lessons arrived only after damage was done. Later that day, Daniel met with the Interim Leadership Council department heads, union representatives, long-ignored voices now seated at the same table. The room looked different without hierarchy dictating where people sat. No one took the head of the table. We're not here to rewrite the past, Daniel said. We're here to decide what the next decade looks like. A facilities supervisor spoke up first, surprising even herself. Then we need to stop pretending respect is cultural, she said. It needs to be operational. Daniel nodded. What does that look like? It looks like consequences that don't depend on who signs your paycheck, she said, and protections that don't require courage to use. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. A younger analyst added, and transparency that doesn't disappear when it's inconvenient. The meeting stretched for hours, not because decisions were slow, but because people were finally being heard. There were disagreements, sharp ones, but they were grounded in substance, not fear. Daniel spoke less than anyone else. When the meeting adjourned, Marcus lingered. That letter you got, Marcus said carefully. You okay? Daniel nodded. It confirmed something I already knew. That change doesn't always feel like justice, Marcus asked. That justice doesn't always feel like relief, Daniel replied. That evening, Daniel attended a small, unpublicized gathering at a community center across town. No press, No branding, just folding chairs and bad coffee. It was the first meeting of the Open Door Initiative. Formerly incarcerated men and women sat beside HR managers who had never before shared space with them. A woman who had lived out of her car for 2 years spoke quietly about reliability, about showing up when no one expected it. A hiring manager listened, uncomfortable and attentive. Daniel sat in the back. At one point, a young man raised his hand. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Most companies just write checks." Daniel didn't stand. He answered from his seat. "Because talent isn't rare," he said. "Opportunity is." The room grew still. Afterward, as people filtered out, a woman approached Daniel hesitantly. "I heard about the little girl," she said. "The one who stopped everything." Daniel nodded. "She didn't stop it," he said. "She revealed it. I was mentor." The woman smiled softly. "I wish someone had listened to me like that once." Daniel held her gaze. "I'm listening now." That night, alone at home, Daniel reread the letter once more before placing it in a drawer he labeled simply, "Reminders." He didn't know yet what he would do with it. Maybe nothing. Maybe someday he would return it unopened. But for now, it served its purpose. It reminded him that justice wasn't about who fell. It was about who stood up next. Weeks passed. The investigation widened. Charges multiplied. Some executives cooperated. Others dug in, clinging to versions of themselves that no longer held weight. The company stabilized not because the storm had passed, but because the foundation was finally being reinforced while the rain still fell. One afternoon, Marcus stepped into Daniel's office with an unusual expression. "Got a message you should see," he said, handing over his phone. It was a short video. Annie, sitting at a small kitchen table, crayons spread in front of her. She held up a piece of paper to the camera. It was a drawing, a hallway. 2 figures, one tall, one small. A big red hand raised between them. At the bottom, in careful, uneven letters, she had written, "Listen first." Daniel felt his throat tighten. Marcus watched quietly. "She wanted you to have it. Tell her," Daniel said, voice low, "that I'll keep it forever." Marcus nodded. That night, Daniel pinned a printed copy of the drawing inside the drawer with the letter. 2 reminders. One from someone who had too much power. One from someone who had none and used it anyway. And Daniel understood, more clearly than ever, that the future of the company would be decided by which reminder he chose to look at when it mattered. The day Annie returned to school, Daniel didn't know. That was intentional. Marcus had insisted on it. No calendar note. No update. No quiet confirmation tucked into a message. Normal meant unremarkable, and unremarkable meant safe. Daniel accepted that, even though a part of him wanted to mark the moment somehow, to acknowledge that a chapter had closed. Instead, the world moved on. The company announced a new interim governance charter, dry language, necessary clauses, footnotes that would bore anyone outside compliance. But inside the building, people read it differently. They read it like a promise that might finally hold. Daniel signed it last, not first. He wanted it clear that this was not a decree. It was a structure people could lean on when courage ran thin. In the weeks that followed, something subtle shifted. Meetings ran longer not because they were inefficient, but because fewer people stayed silent. Junior staff spoke without rehearsing their words. Facilities supervisors pushed back on timelines that ignored reality. Security filed reports that would once have been quietly shelved. Not everything improved. Some people left. Quietly, without accusations or farewells, Daniel let them go. He had learned that reform did not require unanimity, only honesty. One afternoon, Daniel was reviewing quarterly projections when Elaine Porter knocked and entered without waiting for an answer. "You have a visitor," she said. Daniel looked up. "Scheduled?" "No," Elaine replied. "But intentional." She stepped aside. The man who entered looked older than Daniel remembered. Not aged by time alone, but by consequence. His suit was conservative, carefully chosen not to draw attention. His hands were clasped in front of him, fingers tight. One of the executives who had not been arrested. "Not yet. I asked for this meeting," the man said. "I understand if you refuse." With canted tenafter, Daniel studied him for a moment, then gestured to the chair. You have 10 minutes. The man sat, exhaled slowly. I won't defend what we did, he said. I won't pretend ignorance. I knew enough to stop it. I didn't. Daniel said nothing. I convinced myself silence was neutrality. The man continued. That if I didn't act, I wasn't responsible. Daniel leaned back. And now? And now, I know better, the man said. But knowing doesn't undo damage. No, Daniel agreed. It doesn't. Eye of D mine I guided. The man swallowed. I'm cooperating. Fully. I'm not asking for protection. What are you asking for? Daniel asked. The man hesitated. To say this to you directly, and to say it without conditions. Daniel nodded. You've done that. The man stood. I won't take more of your time. When the door closed, Elaine looked at Daniel. You okay? Yes, Daniel said, because he didn't ask for absolution. Elaine nodded. That matters. It is C. Later that week, the first internal audit report was released to staff. Redacted, clear, unforgiving. It detailed how oversight had been bypassed, not through brilliance, but through apathy. How small exceptions became norms. How fear of conflict created space for manipulation. The report ended with a single sentence. These failures were not inevitable. Daniel reread that line more than once. On Friday evening, Marcus joined Daniel in his office, holding a small package. This came today, Marcus said. No return address. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside was a child's book. The cover showed a small character standing in front of a large door, one hand raised. The title read, The Quiet Brave. Inside the front cover, written in careful block letters, were the words, For when you forget. Daniel closed the book slowly. She wanted you to have it, Marcus said. Her dad said. She insisted. Daniel nodded, throat tight. Tell him thank you. Tell her too. Always. Marcus smiled faintly. Already did. That night, Daniel took the book home. He placed it on the shelf beside volumes on leadership, economics, and law books written by people who had never needed to be afraid in a hallway. The contrast was not lost on him. As autumn settled in, the company hosted its first open forum under the new framework. No executives on stage, no prepared remarks, just microphones passed through the audience. Stories came out, some raw, some tentative, some years old and still sharp. Daniel sat among them, not apart. At one point, a woman stood and said, I don't trust this yet. I want to, but trust takes time. Daniel nodded. That's fair. Another voice followed. I stayed quiet because I needed the job. I still do. Daniel answered honestly. Needing a job should never cost you dignity. If it ever does here again, we failed. Applause didn't erupt. Something better happened. People nodded. Afterward, as the room emptied, Daniel remained seated, absorbing the echo of voices that had once been trapped inside people's chests. Marcus approached quietly. You know, he said, none of this would have happened if you'd walked into that room on time. Daniel smiled without humor. I know. You ever think about that? Marcus asked. How close it was. Every day. Daniel said. But I don't think about what I avoided. What do you think about? Daniel looked at the empty chairs. What I almost missed. That weekend, Daniel received a final message from Annie's father. She got an award today. Perfect attendance. She wanted me to tell you she didn't say stop this time. She just raised her hand. Daniel stared at the message, then typed back. That's even better. He set the phone down and stood by the window, watching the city settle into evening. The danger had not vanished. There would be appeals, counter-stories, attempts to wait him out. But something fundamental had changed. The silence was gone. And Daniel Wright understood now that leadership was not measured by how loudly you spoke when it was your turn, but by whether you listened when it wasn't. By winter, the noise had thinned. Not disappeared, never that, but softened, like a storm that had moved far enough away to stop rattling the windows. The company was no longer trending. Headlines had shifted to other scandals, other outrage cycles. The lawsuits crawled forward in quiet courtrooms. Investigations continued without spectacle, and life inside the building settled into something closer to honest work. Daniel noticed it in small ways. People no longer waited for him to leave a room before disagreeing. Meetings ended with unresolved questions instead of forced consensus. An assistant corrected him once politely, firmly about a timeline he had misunderstood. Daniel thanked her. That moment stayed with him longer than most boardroom victories ever had. One cold morning, Daniel arrived early and found the lobby lights still dim. The cleaning crew moved methodically across the floor, their carts humming softly. He paused near the entrance, watching a woman straighten a rug that had been slightly crooked for weeks. She noticed him and froze. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I'll finish." "No," Daniel said gently. "It looks good." She nodded, unsure what to do next. "Thank you," he added. She smiled then, small and surprised, and returned to her work. Daniel walked on. Later that day, Marcus stepped into Daniel's office carrying a thick folder. "Final internal report," he said. "This is the last one." Daniel took it but didn't open it right away. "Any surprises?" Marcus considered. "Only how long people waited." Daniel nodded. "That seems to be the theme." The report confirmed what Daniel already knew. The conspiracy had not been brilliant. It had been patient. It relied on the assumption that no one would challenge it because doing so was inconvenient, risky, or simply exhausting. The system hadn't failed loudly. It had failed politely. That afternoon, Daniel attended a quiet ceremony in a windowless conference room. No press, no speeches, just a handful of people standing in a loose circle. Marcus was there. Elaine Porter, a few department heads, and several employees whose names Daniel had learned only recently. The purpose was simple: formal recognition for individuals who had come forward during the investigation. No bonuses, no plaques on walls, just letters placed in files that would follow them wherever they went. Documentation that courage had been acknowledged, not punished. One man accepted his letter with shaking hands. "I almost didn't say anything," he admitted. "I kept thinking it wasn't my place." Daniel met his eyes. "It is always your place to tell the truth." The man nodded, blinking rapidly. After the ceremony, Elaine lingered. "You've changed the temperature here," she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That sounds uncomfortable." "It is," Elaine replied. "For people who liked the old climate." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then we're doing something right." That evening, Daniel went home earlier than usual. The city was already dark, lights reflecting off wet pavement from an earlier rain. He stopped by a small bookstore on the corner near his apartment, one he'd passed for years without entering. Inside, the air smelled like paper and dust and coffee. He wandered without purpose until a thin book on a low shelf caught his eye. It was about listening, real listening, not the kind taught in leadership seminars. The author wrote about silence as an invitation rather than an absence. Daniel bought it. At home, he placed it beside The Quiet Brave on the shelf. 2 books, different languages, the same lesson. A few days later, Daniel received an envelope forwarded from the office mailroom. No return address. Inside was a crayon drawing. It showed a classroom, a teacher at the front, several children at desks. One child had her hand raised, not urgently, not fearfully, just raised. Below it, in uneven letters, were the words, "You don't have to be scared to talk." Daniel sat at his kitchen table for a long time, the paper resting between his hands. He thought of all the meetings he had attended where people spoke because they had to, not because they believed it was safe. He thought of all the times he had mistaken confidence for competence. He folded the drawing carefully and placed it with the others. Spring arrived slowly. With it came the conference that had once been postponed. This time, it was smaller, more focused. No dramatic keynote, no sweeping declarations. Daniel spoke briefly. "We are not here to celebrate," he said. "We are here to commit." He outlined the changes not as triumphs, but as responsibilities. Oversight, transparency, protection, accountability. No applause followed. That was fine. After the session, as people dispersed into smaller discussions, Daniel stepped aside, content to let the room move without him at its center. A young man approached hesitantly. "Mr. Wright?" "Yes. I just wanted to say, I used the reporting system last month," the man said. "It worked." Daniel nodded. "I'm glad." The man smiled, relieved, and walked away. That night, Daniel stood on his balcony, the city humming below. He thought about how close everything had come to ending differently, how easily he could have walked into that room, How neatly the trap had been set. He understood now that history often pivoted on moments that looked insignificant from the outside. A delayed step, a raised hand, a voice that refused to lower itself. Daniel breathed in the cool night air and felt something like quiet resolve settle into place. Not confidence, commitment, because the work ahead was not about maintaining power. It was about maintaining attention, and attention, he had learned, was something you chose every day. The verdict did not come with a gavel. It came with an email marked confidential, delivered at 6:12 a.m. on a Tuesday when Daniel was already awake, sitting at his kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold in his hands. Charges filed, assets frozen, cooperation agreements accepted. Daniel read the message once, then again, slower. There was no triumph in it, no sense of finality. Justice, he was learning, did not announce itself the way movies suggested. It arrived quietly, like confirmation that a long illness had finally been named. By the time he reached the office, Marcus was already there. "It's official," Marcus said. "Federal indictments, multiple counts, financial fraud, conspiracy." Daniel nodded. "How many?" "Enough," Marcus replied. "More than the headlines will say." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of it settling between them. "It's strange," Marcus said finally. "I thought I'd feel relieved." "I go." "And?" Daniel asked. "I just feel steady," Marcus said. Like the ground stopped moving. Daniel understood that feeling well. The company issued a statement that afternoon. Short, factual, no victory lap, no moralizing, just acknowledgement and a commitment to continue cooperating fully. The press reacted as expected. Some praised restraint, others accused Daniel of orchestrating the narrative from the beginning. A few tried, one last time, to resurrect the idea that everything had started because of a child. Daniel did not respond. He had learned when silence clarified rather than concealed. That evening, Daniel attended a small internal gathering in the atrium. Not a celebration, not a memorial, just an update, delivered face to face. "I won't pretend this is over," he said to the employees gathered around him. "There will be appeals, there will be fallout. Some of it will be uncomfortable." His nod. He paused, scanning the faces, some familiar now, others still cautious. "But the most important part already happened," he continued. "You spoke, and you were heard." No applause followed, just nods, quiet agreement. That was enough. Later that week, Daniel received a message from a teacher in Annie's new school district. The email was polite, careful, clearly written by someone who understood boundaries. "I don't know if this is appropriate, but Annie wrote something for a class assignment about someone who listened to her. She asked if I could send it to you." Daniel stared at the screen, then typed back, "Yes, thank you." The attachment arrived an hour later. It was a short paragraph, written in uneven handwriting, spelled phonetically in places. "I was scared, but I talked anyway." He didn't yell. He waited. I think grown-ups forget that waiting is important. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He printed the page and placed it with the others' drawings. Letters, reminders no longer hidden away in a drawer, but kept openly on a shelf behind his desk. Marcus noticed it the next time he came in. "She's going to grow up strong," Marcus said quietly. "She already is," Daniel replied. As summer approached, the company hosted its annual review, not the glossy event it once had been, but a working session. Panels replaced speeches. Questions replaced applause. Daniel participated, but he did not dominate. When asked directly how he would summarize the past year, he answered simply, "We learned that systems don't protect people. People protect people. Systems only help if they're built to listen." Someone asked, "What happens if leadership changes again?" Daniel did not hesitate. "Then the systems must outlive the leader. Otherwise, we've failed." That answer traveled farther than any press release ever had. One afternoon, long after most employees had left for the day, Daniel walked the building alone. He didn't announce himself. He didn't schedule anything. He stopped at the hallway, the same one. It looked smaller now. Or perhaps he had grown more aware of its ordinariness. Neutral walls, soft lighting. A place designed to move people through without pause. He stood there for a moment, remembering a small hand raised, a voice shaking, but firm. "Mr. Stop," he asked. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. So much had followed that moment. So much pain avoided. So much uncovered. Entire lives redirected. And yet, the hallway remained just a hallway. He smiled faintly. That, too, felt right. At home that night, Daniel sat on his balcony, the city warm and loud below him. Somewhere out there, people were making decisions that would never make headlines. Choices to speak or stay quiet, to wait or to rush, to listen or to dismiss. He thought of how close he had come to missing everything. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Marcus. We should plan for succession. Real succession. The reply came quickly. Already started. Daniel smiled, because that, too, mattered. Not building something that depended on him, but something that could stand without him if it had to. As the night deepened, Daniel looked once more at the shelf inside. Visible through the glass doors, the letters, the drawings, the book titled The Quiet Brave. They were not trophies. They were anchors, reminders that power was loud, but truth was patient, and that sometimes the most important moment in a life was not when you spoke, but when you stopped long enough to listen. The last meeting ended without ceremony. No applause, no closing remarks, just chairs sliding back, folders closing, people standing and leaving the room with the quiet efficiency of those who trusted that nothing important was being hidden once they walked out. Daniel remained seated until the room was empty. He had learned not to rush endings. Outside the windows, late afternoon light washed the city in gold. Traffic moved steadily. Somewhere, a siren wailed and faded. Life, uninterrupted. Elaine Porter stepped back into the room, pausing when she saw Daniel still there. You don't have to stay, she said gently. I know, Daniel replied. I want to. She nodded, understanding, and left him alone again. Daniel stood at last and walked the length of the conference room, running his hand along the table's smooth surface. This was not the room where everything had changed. That room was smaller, narrower, easier to overlook, but this was where it would end. He turned off the lights himself. Later that evening, Daniel addressed the company one final time, not as an emergency, not as damage control, but as transition. The message was simple. The systems were in place. The oversight independent, the leadership council permanent. His role would change, narrowing by design. He would remain accountable, but no longer central. Power redistributed. Trust reinforced. He did not frame it as an exit. He framed it as continuity. When the message ended, Daniel closed his laptop and did not reopen it. That night, he walked home. Not driven, not escorted, just walking. Coat collar turned up against the cooling air. The city greeted him, without recognition, which felt right. At a corner he passed often, a streetlight flickered, then steadied. He paused beneath it for no reason other than habit. Waiting, he realized, had become a skill. At home, Daniel moved through his apartment slowly. He brewed tea. He watered the plant by the window he kept forgetting about. He stood for a long time looking at the shelf, the letters, the drawings, the book. He took down the first drawing Annie had sent the hallway, the red hand raised. He studied it, as if seeing it for the first time. A child's line, a child's courage. He placed it back carefully. Later, as he sat at the kitchen table, his phone buzzed. A message from Annie's father. She's going to present at school tomorrow. Show and tell. She's bringing her drawing. Daniel smiled. What is she going to say? He typed. The reply came after a moment. She says it's about how you don't have to be loud to be important. Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes. That might be the truest lesson of all, he thought. The next morning, Daniel woke early. Not out of urgency, but habit. He dressed simply, as he always had, and stepped onto the balcony. The city was waking. Deliveries, commuters, people whose names he would never know, each carrying their own quiet decisions. He thought about the path ahead. There would be setbacks. There would be people who tried to bend the systems again. There always were. Integrity was not permanent. It required maintenance. But now, maintenance no longer depended on one man. That mattered. Weeks later, Daniel attended the company's next board meeting as an observer, not a driver. He sat at the side, listened, spoke only when asked. When a disagreement arose, it was resolved without looking to him. He felt no loss, only relief. Afterward, as he gathered his things, Marcus joined him. "You did it," Marcus said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "We did." Marcus smiled. Annie's teacher emailed again, by the way. Daniel looked up. "She asked the class what courage meant," Marcus continued. "Annie said courage is when you're scared but someone listens anyway. It is another." Daniel felt something settle in his chest, not pride, not nostalgia, but peace. That evening, Daniel returned to the hallway one last time, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to leave something behind. He stood where he had stood before, imagining the sound of that small voice, the raised hand, the moment the world shifted without knowing it had. Then he turned and walked away. No plaque marked the place. No sign explained what had happened there. And that was exactly right. Because the story was never about the hallway, it was about the pause, the space between impulse and action. The moment when someone chooses to listen instead of dismiss. Years later, most people would forget the names, the scandal, the headlines. Even the company itself would change, merge, evolve. But somewhere, a girl would grow up knowing that her voice mattered. And somewhere else, a system would still be standing because it had been built to hear voices like hers. Daniel stepped out into the city, blending into it without effort. He was no longer needed at the center. And that, finally, was the measure of success. Because true power does not announce itself. It listens. And when it does, quietly, patiently, the world changes. Not all at once, not loudly, but enough to matter. The story reminds us that real power is revealed not by how we treat those who can benefit us, but by how we listen to those we believe have nothing to offer. It teaches that injustice often survives not because it is loud, but because good people look away, rush forward, or choose comfort over attention. A quiet voice, even the voice of a child, can change the course of events when it is met with patience instead of dismissal. The lesson is simple but demanding. Dignity is not earned through status, appearance, or authority. It is owed to every human being, and when we slow down enough to truly listen, especially to the most vulnerable, we don't just prevent harm, we build a world where courage no longer has to shout to be heard. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.